Rutgers-Illinois, the final sequence. David Anderson and I wanted to go through it. Let's set the stage. 3:32 to play. Rutgers leading Illinois 24-22. Luke Altmaier scrambles and scores on a 30-yard touchdown run with 3:07 left. Illinois converts a 2-point conversion and leads 30-24. David, thoughts starting there?
So looking back at that drive, that was really where we got to the point where if you're a player in that game, and possibly a coach, but I can speak more from player, is you're starting to realize, like, we really can't stop them. I mean, Illinois had been hitting Rutgers on the air, but on that drive, looking back at it, they only completed one pass, and it was very early in the drive. They got yardage on a pass interference call on Robert Longerbeam. They got a Illinois pass interference themselves, setting their own team back on a 2nd and 26, which then Rutgers got called for a defensive holding on the subsequent play. But it was mostly on the ground, capped by Altmaier's 30-yard run for a TD, which was actually his second run in a row. So 3:07 left. You and I are texting each other. We're like, does the Rutgers offense have what it takes to make this comeback? And really, I mean, there are very few Rutgers offenses in my lifetime that I would have confidence to actually take this back. I mean, the only time I remember Rutgers scoring in the Schiano 2.0 era on something like this was in the Michigan game that they ultimately lost in overtime, where they were down by 8, and Noah Vedral just kept hammering in with passes to Shameen Jones, and then they even converted the 2-point conversion on like a miracle. There was a play to one was to Kirkshank and one was to Vedral, but like in the moment, I had decent level of confidence that Rutgers' offense would score. My concern was, would it be enough, and would Illinois score again? But in that moment, it didn't feel like this game was over, like so many other Rutgers games have in the past. I think that's what you had mentioned in your podcast, correct?
Yeah, because I think everyone felt the game change when Callie McManus had that fumble and Illinois had all the momentum. But yes, I agree. I mean, in terms of how I felt, okay, there's 3 minutes to go. The offense has been moving the ball pretty effectively. They have a chance to win this at the end. And you're right. That's not a normal, often feeling that you have with Rutgers in the hole. I think last year, maybe Michigan State game, once that momentum started happening in the fourth quarter, you felt it. Even in the Minnesota fourth quarter, it kind of snowballed, but that was really more the defense that created that. And then the Maryland game, that was more the whole second half, but you had confidence the offense wasn't going to be stopped, I think, towards the end there. But they built a big enough lead. But with the game on the line, one drive to go, yeah, this is the first time since that Michigan game, I think. And I certainly thought they could do it. But it was quite a drive with a lot of – it kind of was symbolic of the whole season in terms of the roller coaster ride this final drive for Rutgers offense was.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy part about it was we knew at the time this was going to be a microcosm of the entire season. Because if you score, it demonstrates how the team bounced back off the mat and punched one in. If you don't score, it demonstrates how, yeah, you fought back, but ultimately you came up short, which is what made it just like, rarely does a microcosm set itself up for that granular going in either direction. And so Illinois then has the kickoff, and remind me, they kicked it out of bounds or?
Yes, the second time in the second half, right by the Rutgers sideline, the second time. And oh, by the way, it's Ethan Marzalewski who kicked it. We'll remember his name later in this conversation. So Marzalewski kicks it 51 yards. It goes out of bounds at the Rutgers 14, and they take it over on their own 35 with 3:07 to play.
Right. So the first play, Rutgers shows us what they're made of by, first of all, just not handing it to Cal Monungai, which they did a pretty good job all day of running pass. And the key was that they hit Miller for that first pass, which if they would have hit Strong, would have been like, okay. But really it felt like, okay, to make this happen, you need at least Miller and Strong, or at least two of your offensive playmakers making plays. So Miller, who we talked about this a little bit, his catch radius, he's had some, not necessarily pure drops, not concentration drops, but balls that he probably could have caught, maybe not perfectly thrown. But he gets that 10 yards, first down right away, and like, okay, here we go. And a lot of times you see in these situations, whether you're a player, a fan, that the first play or just getting that first down is critical because then you get the defense on their heels. Or if you're the defense yourself, you're like, okay, now we're on our heels. You really want to stop them on that first 3 and out. And I believe Rutgers still had all 3 timeouts at this point.
Correct.
So there was a mathematical scenario that they could have, let's say, got stopped on a 4th down, called all 3 timeouts. Illinois, let's say, gets a field goal, but then you get the ball back. So time was not really a factor, and it was even possible that if Rutgers went 3 and out right away, they would have got the ball back, especially now that they have the 2-minute timeout in college football. So clock is not necessarily a factor, though this is when you start to think about, like, scoring too early a little bit. But when you're down by 6, and we harped on this in the past 2 weeks, when you're down by 6, you can't leave it to chance. Really, if you're down by 3 is the perfect scenario because then once you're in field goal range, then you feel safe with the field goal. You can milk it down, but by being down 6 or basically 4 or more, you need the touchdown. And so Rutgers started moving the ball. All right, so Rutgers now faces the first real drama of this drive. It's 3rd and 10 at the Illinois 40. Calais McManus ends up throwing a pass that kind of sails on him and looks like it is intercepted. It's ruled on the field as an interception. And for most of football history, would you agree that that was an interception?
Yeah, well, even if I didn't think it was an interception, I would say there was not enough evidence to completely overturn it. So I thought, there might have been a chance that technically, it hit the ground and maybe it wasn't, but I didn't think there was enough there for them to overturn it. I was not expecting them to overturn that call as an interception.
Right. I'm with you. I really didn't think they would overturn it, though I do think it hit the ground because a lot of times you see a lot of those traps.
It was
and they've
barely,
been really focused on it.
barely, but I do think it did, and the way it kind of like turned at one point. But I was not confident as a Rutgers fan that they would overturn it.
And I will add another element of this, not just as a fan, coach, player, as a former official, and anyone who's reffed any sort of sport, even if it's kids, 2nd grade basketball, you don't really want a game to end when on a 50-50 call where it basically effectively ends the game for one team.
Yeah.
Because in your mind as a ref and this is just human nature, right? In your mind as a ref, you're thinking, okay, it's still 4th and 10. If they can't stop him on 4th and 10, like, come on. Which, lo and behold, will become a factor later. But Rutgers luckily gets the ball back, and then they have extra time to prepare, which was very much a theme in this game.
Yes.
Both offenses, anytime that there was an injury, which was all day,
Yeah.
anytime there was a media timeout, a turnover, anything like that, when these offenses were given extra time, again, we'll keep coming back to it, they seem to come up with a play. And I don't necessarily think that Rutgers designed it for Ethan Calais McManus to run, but he clearly knew that side of the field was going to be cleared out and that he might have room to run there. And so, I mean, he tucked it and ran pretty quickly and ended up gaining 15 yards to the Illinois 25. Any other thoughts on how gutsy that play was?
Yeah, gutsiest run of the season. No disrespect. Gutsiest run of the season. No disrespect to Kyle Monungai, but just in terms of the situation and it being Calais McManus and the game he had on the ground, already having the fumble, being able to gut that out was just absolutely huge. And again, just one of many reasons why this loss is so hard to swallow, because that run would, just be
iconic.
Thought about, it would be iconic. And I thought that all of a sudden it's like, they're living the lives of 9 lives of a cat here, where we thought the game was over on the interception, and then it's 4th and 10. And how often do they ever convert that? And then they're able to do that on the quarterback scramble, no less. It just, at that point, it felt like, okay, momentum is really starting to roll here. They're going to score.
Right. So Illinois calls their timeout on this one. And then Rutgers
There's an incomplete pass to Strong.
Right. Which I don't remember that play particularly well. I don't remember if it hit his hands or whatever. But then subsequently, Athan runs again for 12 yards, 13 yards. It was roughly down to the 12 or 13 yard line, depending on what you say the spot was, which, again, I mean, I don't know what the play call was really, like, to just tug it and run. But, I mean, 2nd and 10, picking up 12 yards, like, that is a sign that the defense cannot stop you. That even on 2nd and 10, you're running for 12 because there's 1:23 left. So, and Illinois knows, again, let's talk about the mind of the player. Illinois' defense knows you cannot allow a touchdown. So that's one of the reasons that they're playing a little bit back. They're willing to concede it. Time's not really a factor yet, but this is the point in the game where Illinois' defense, yeah, you're okay with him not throwing a touchdown, but you don't want to give up first downs. And so that was a clearly bad situation for them. So that sets up the first real controversy of what's going on. I think you talked about this. Rutgers snaps the ball with a lot of time on the play clock at the Illinois 13-yard line. And so I guess this is the first time I'm going to ask you, did you notice how much time was on the play clock at that moment? Number one. And number two, how concerned were you in the moment that happened?
So, truthfully, I did not notice how much was on the play clock because it was just such a quick momentum thing. And it was like, are they going to score? Are they going to score? Are they going to score? And then when they scored, I immediately said, oh, shit.
Yeah.
There's too much. I turned to my wife and I said, there's too much time left on the clock. Although, in fairness, yes, you could have waited to snap the ball. I get that. But I also think the way momentum was trending.
Agree.
It's like the avalanche, it was like a wave in the ocean starting to crest, and you had to ride it. I think, how many times this year did we see Rutgers stall inside the red zone, inside the 10-yard line, inside the 5-yard line? And I just think that they felt that momentum, and they just had to topple the Illinois defense over in that moment. So, yes, hindsight's 2020. It's easy to criticize. They didn't run the play clock off. Personally, I don't have that much of an issue with it because I think you had to score above all else, and they did. That doesn't mean you couldn't be upset that, darn, there's over a minute to play. Now, can the defense stop them after giving up 3 straight touchdowns? But in that moment, I think if you had a chance again, honestly, I think it's a little too cute to say, well, you could have just run another 30 seconds off. Yes, in theory you could have, but you're playing a little bit with dice there. I think overall you have to score any way you can, and I think they did the right thing.
Yeah, I agree with you on several fronts. One, if this was a fade in the end zone, you could kind of argue with it. But this was meant to be a check down to your back that you think is going for, 5-6 yards, even if he breaks open, or maybe a safety will tackle him. So it wasn't that the play call, like if you take 4 shots there, let's say you take 4 shots to the end zone on fade routes and you complete the 4th one and the same amount of time runs off the clock. Okay, then we can be a little bit critical because it's like you stop the clock on incompletion 4 times. No, this was not necessarily a check down. It looked like it was kind of a design pass. But, I mean, I know Colin Nunga is a great player, but you don't expect that to go for a touchdown. You expect it to maybe he breaks the first tackle and then he stopped at like the 2 or 3. But once he had it, in no universe does it make – I mean, if anyone was thinking this, I would be surprised. I think it's very hindsight to say, like, he should have stepped out at the 1-yard line. Because we've seen this team take 7 plays to score from the 1-yard line at one point this season.
Or not.
6 plays to not score from the 1-yard line against Nebraska, 2-yard line against Nebraska. So, and to your point, I mean, your crowd is on your side. If you draw that out, the momentum of your crowd is going to start to diminish. The defense is starting to catch their wind because let's say even if they stop you on that play, then they might be a little bit more rested for the following play. So I think it was a good play call, smart play call, and you got to go in there. You just like the only time that there's only 2 times I can remember a Rutgers player I thought should have stepped out of bounds. One, Janarian Grant's touchdown against Washington State on the punt return, because There was no way we felt in that stadium. I was sitting right on that corner of the end zone where he ran in.
Yep.
There's no way that we felt like Rutgers could stop that Washington State team. And then they almost ended up getting an interception on the first play. But that was one. And then the other one was the Bo Melton play against Indiana when they ran all the laterals. Because by going into the end zone, the play was reviewable. If you would have went down at the 1-inch line, the play wouldn't have been reviewable, and then you punch it in. Because in that moment, we knew, like, maybe not exactly which lateral was forward, but, like, it's possible that one of them was forward. And by going in the end zone, they're going to review this for, 30 minutes because of how many laterals there were. But in this moment, I did not feel like he should not go in. That being said, then you got to go for the extra point because it's tied. You get the extra point, and that's when I texted you, this defense needs to stop them in 1 minute and 8 seconds, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point, question mark. And so, yes, it for me was kind of hindsight because as a player, you got to try to score there. And a defense is not in a position where they're allowing you to score because they were up by a touchdown. If they were only up by 3, then there's sometimes the coaches will say, like, let them score in a sense, because it's like, we need the time, if it's 4 points or whatever. Like Denver famously in that Super Bowl against the Packers scored a touchdown because Mike Holmgren said, let them score. We're never going to stop them if all they need is a field goal at the end. So no, I think the defense was trying to stop them. Rutgers was trying to score. At this point, I have minimal complaints with anything that has happened from either coaching staff, and then it'll get dicey after that. But any other thoughts when Rutgers is lining up for that kickoff, like kick it out of the end zone, or just anything else about this moment about going up by 1 point?
Yeah, so I really think the play call by Shiraka was absolutely brilliant because, I mean, it was only the 14th catch from Monungai this year. He, we've talked about throughout the year and last year, like, he really isn't a very, it's not his strength in terms of catching the ball out of the backfield. Like you said, I think it was more of like I don't know if it was a check down or the second or third option in the play, but you really don't expect, that kind of pass play to end up in the end zone from the red zone. And just the fact that also that was the first touch in the drive for Monungai, the 10th play of the drive. 9 straight plays never went to him. It's like they lulled Illinois to sleep, and then they pulled Monungai out at the last minute and used them in a way they rarely do. I just think it was just I don't know if they were setting it up the whole time or not, but it was just executed flawlessly. And I think that was what was so remarkable about the touchdown drive is not only did they come through, but the way in which they came through, almost having the interception, Callie Manis with those 2 runs, and then Monungai with the catch and run, just in ways that we're not used to seeing Rutgers make plays. It was really satisfying. And although I was terrified with 1 minute and 8 to go and the defense taking over, you just, obviously Patel getting the extra point, you breathe a little bit there, and then the kickoff, you're like, please, don't kick it out of bounds.
Don't kick it out of bounds.
Yeah. So he came through with there. So then the stage is set.
Let me say one other thing. Well, 2 more things. One, because of Athan running to that side, it was a nice wrinkle to then throw to that space because it also put that defender in conflict. If hypothetically he was worried about Athan running, Athan might have been able to go out of the pocket and then just dump it over to Monungai. So there was also these extra wrinkles that were built in that might have either worked there or set them up for later. But I will admit, even at this point, ever since the Athan fumble, I didn't have overwhelming confidence Rutgers was going to win the game, which will matter later because I didn't feel like, oh, this one's over at all.
Right. No.
If anything, I still felt like I wasn't looking at the ESPN like a chance to win the game, but I was still thinking, I think that Illinois could easily move this ball all the way down the field. All they need is a field goal. And we weren't even thinking about the wind at that point. But this is where I first want to start getting on the coaching staff, okay? The first thing that you have to think about, okay, it's hard to plan before that because you don't know how much time's left, whatever. But at this point, both coaching staffs should have in their mind what the distance that they think that they're comfortable with their kicker kicking or defending a kick. So if you're Illinois, you gotta be sure, like, okay, how many, you probably already decided this on the previous drive, But, okay, what distance are we comfortable with our kicker kicking? Okay, that's number one. And then on the Rutgers side, same thing. What distance are we comfortable with letting them kick? And this is where it gets a little dicey because as soon as the drive starts, things get crazy. I can tell you from being in there, it's kind of like, in a basketball game when there's like 10 seconds left, team's down by 1, and it's like could go for the foul, don't go for the foul, you foul, you might get free throws. So you're kind of all over the place and things just happen very fast. And so this has to be thought of in advance about okay, how comfortable are we in this situation? You could also argue Rutgers should have in their mind known how if they would what coverages they would play in that situation. I'll give them a semi pass on that because they had injuries on the drive, if I remember right. So it got a little wild. But at this point, you should know. And so we'll come back to this in a second. But there's certain things going into this drive you have to have in your mind, like what our substitutions are going to be, what coverages we're going to play, because things are going to happen fast. Like they're going to be running to the line, etc. And how many timeouts did Illinois have at this point? They still had 2, to my understanding, because they had called 1 on the previous drive defensively. So Illinois had 2 timeouts, 1 minute and 8 seconds left. So on the first play,
correct.
In the first play, same exact as Rutgers on the previous drive. They completed an 11-yard pass, move the chains. So you start thinking like, oh no, here we go. Next play, Rutgers only rushes 3 or 4, and Aaron Lewis gets the sack. That was so close to being a strip sack that, 2 things happened on that play. One, the crowd, I think, woke up to the fact that, hey, we might actually stop them.
Yeah.
And 2, you kind of think, okay, well, if Aaron Lewis could get pressure, maybe we don't have to blitz, which is very important. And I can tell you from a player standpoint, this is equally important because in the huddle defensively, or not even the huddle nowadays, but just everyone standing around, guys might be pointing out like, we need to blitz, or like, because sometimes the play call comes in from the sideline and it's almost like an option route for a quarterback where a linebacker will see, hey, if I'm not covering anybody, blitz. Or if I'm covering the running back and he's in the block, blitz. So there are some factors there, but because Lewis got pressure, I think the linebacking core felt like, okay, hey, we don't have to blitz in this situation. Okay, rightfully or wrongfully. But anyway, Lewis gets the sack, and because of the sack, Illinois has to call timeout. Their second timeout, 53 seconds on the clock, ball at their own 32-yard line. So now you're starting to think, okay, that's time is starting to run low. But what other thoughts did you have on the Lewis sack?
Well, it was awesome to see him come through, and it felt like he was willing the defense to stop Illinois. And you just felt like when he almost had the strip sack, and it was like, wow, here he is in the moment you need him, and can they ride that out? And with the timeout, you're like, okay, they're down to 1 with less than a minute to go. That stops the momentum there. You started to feel some optimism that, hey, they're gonna pull this out.
Right. But again, going back to that other theme, with the timeout, Illinois comes back with a great play call.
Yeah.
And they throw it 2nd and 14, get the ball into Rutgers territory. So now, kind of like we talked about last 2 weeks about like kind of like this baseball analogy with leverage. Like, okay, Rutgers has got the slight advantage. It's 2nd and long from the 32. Now it's flipped. Now Illinois has got the advantage because they're on the Rutgers side of the field. All they need is a field goal. They only need conceivably 15, 20 yards. We'll get to that in a second. But great play call. And then remind me, was the next play a spike or did he actually try to attempt a pass?
No, he actually threw it deep to Kapka. Pass deep to left, incomplete, intended for Kapka Jones. Thrown to the Rutgers 25. It was a dead ball, 35 seconds to go. Second and 10 at the Rutgers 47.
So basically, they didn't spike it, but you're going for a flag or a big play, trying to catch them reeling. Okay, but it's incomplete. Yep. So then the next play was the penalty on Longer Beam, if I'm remembering right.
Yes, it was a pass to Bryant at the Rutgers 38, and Longer Beam was called for a 10-yard holding, automatic first down, 30 seconds to go. 1st and 10 at the Rutgers 37 for Illinois.
Right. And this key play there, and this was a big concern, was that's really when I felt, and I imagine other people felt the same way, they can get a pass interference whenever they want.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with playing pure man-to-man coverage with no help on the outside, which, again, would unfortunately come back to bite them. But I just felt like, okay, if Robert Longerbeam, who's one of your better cover guys, I mean, he's not playing 100%, but if he is just getting called for holding, like, they're just going to be looking for those penalties.
Yeah.
And luckily on the next play, even with a little extra time, because of the flag, Illinois, Altmaier only ran for 2 yards. That was the play when he ran out to the right, if I'm remembering correctly.
Igbeneusen at
so
the
he basically ran the same play as he had on the touchdown on the previous drive, where he tried to just run it around the outside. But yeah, Igbeneusen sniffed it out, and a guy again who had kind of been missing in action for a couple weeks there makes a huge play, because I think it wasn't just the fact that they didn't get a first down or get out of bounds, but momentum wise, it felt like, okay, we're kind of getting the momentum a little bit back here, that they're not even trying to throw the ball. And the previous drive, like we said, they didn't complete any passes. This drive they've completed 2. Like, maybe the secondary is ready. But ultimately then he throws an incomplete pass, 19 seconds left, and then the false start, which puts them in 3rd and 13. Any other thoughts on that part of the sequence?
Well, this drive was like a heavyweight fight. I mean, it was back and forth where Illinois made a big pass, and then the Rutgers defense came up with a big stop. It was a senior each time. So it just felt like, which way would it go? But it was certainly nerve-wracking. But after that false start and to push them back to the 40, I felt confident that, okay, they're at, 53, 54. That's still a long field goal, but 58, I mean, come on. That's like crazy, especially with the way the weather was. You knew they were kicking into the wind. It just felt like Illinois was going to probably throw it into the end zone at some point, and it was going to be a 50-50 ball up in the air. That's what I was thinking, which didn't make me confident per se, but I thought that that's how it would end.
Yeah, so once we got to that 3rd and 13, or I'm sorry, on 3rd and 8, I still had almost no confidence Rutgers would stop them, to be honest, personally. But that might be just years of being bludgeoned as a fan of this program, or in general Rutgers sports programs. But once they got the false start, it kind of felt like for the first time in the half that Illinois' offense was maybe a little bit feeling the pressure or discombobulated. So on 3rd and 13, he throws, and to me, it looked like there was no attempt to complete the pass. Like, he was just trying to get a flag, is what it looked like.
Yes.
On the 3rd down. So, I mean, we could backtrack in a second. But really, by the time you get to 3rd, your defensive coaches, special teams coaches, and whoever is the CEO of whatever's going on out there, which is probably Schiano, unless he's getting too involved in the defense, which could be. But if he's getting too involved in the defense, you need somebody else who's behind in the booth or whoever that's kind of taking over the macro level things that are happening. Timeout calling, special teams preparation type of thing. And so once it's 3rd and 13 and they throw that incomplete pass, it was like, okay, they're not even trying to complete a pass. They might go for the field goal here. And this is where, obviously, the first crux of it, and we've been already talking a long time, but more than I thought we would up to this point. But at this point, a couple things can happen. Now, Schiano, this is where we'll start talking about the press conferences, right? Schiano said in his press conference that he knew you couldn't call back-to-back timeouts, right? Which to me means that you have to have known how far of a kick are you willing to let them try and ice them or not. And Richie O'Leary gave some good stats on ice versus no ice, just in a pure vacuum. But you should have already decided how long of a kick you're comfortable with them taking. Because if you call timeout there, then they can either kick again or change their mind. And if they change their mind, there's no coach in America who wants to call a timeout more if the other team changes their mind than Greg Schiano. And that was my bigger concern was once they lined up for the field goal, just like Larry K vented pretty well, I'm like, let them kick. Just let them kick it. And as someone who never kicked in an actual game, but practiced plenty of kicking in college football in bad weather conditions. I'm like, there's no way he's making it. And then even from the TV angle, I know that's not the angle on the field, but on the field, it's actually more extreme if you've ever been on a sideline.
Yeah.
You see how far, like on TV, sometimes it's deceiving. But in the field, you're like, there's no way this guy's going to make this kick. And so I was just livid. I never dropped more bad language in the time with my wife than I did in that particular moment, because I knew like it was the wrong move. Whether they stop on the next play or not was a moot point. Now, Bielema is saying he knew Shiano was going to ice him. I will give him a slight benefit of the doubt on that, because Shiano does pretty much do it every time. And good advanced scouting will tell you that. As a fan of this program, that's why I want to turn it back to you. How confident were you that Shiano was going to try to ice him?
Well, I was so caught up in the Illinois field goal team scrambling on the field to get the kick off. And that's the other thing, is that the play clock, I mean, there was so much against Illinois in this moment. And personally, I think Bielema's full of crap, because also in his on-field interview immediately after, he was beside himself and he was giddy and he was laughing. He was laughing at Rutgers and was like, he said, like, I'm really happy they called the timeout. I think it's revisionist history, and he's trying to kind of save face a little bit, because that's a heck of a bluff. Like, why?
Oh yeah.
Like if you think Shiano, like, what if Shiano was playing the long game? Is like, he's gonna know, they know each other. He's gonna know I'm gonna call a timeout. I'm gonna be disciplined enough not to do it. Obviously, he wasn't. Bielema was right, but you don't bluff like that and hope that or just think that shit. Like, I guess my point is, how did anyone on either sideline think that guy was going to make that kick, especially when the kickoff that he made earlier in the quarter went 15 yards out of bounds? Like, I mean, I can't imagine what the wind felt like on the sidelines.
Oh man,
fans talking about it in the stands. Like, it just seems both coaches were being absurd in their logic, and that's what killed me. Is I think,
he didn't get outsmarted. They both made a bad choice.
He took the bait, and the whole thing about, I think he said in the post game too, like they wanted to talk it over if it was a fake field goal on 4th and 13 from the 41. Like, well,
I'll make a comment about that. A couple things about this part, right? The 4th and 13 is a huge factor, because if you are Illinois, you can't take a false start, because like there's certain times where I've seen teams, more so in the NFL than college, where they almost tell their team to fake a false start, like to take a false start, because they don't feel right, or they're worried that their kick's going to be blocked. So then maybe they're not the center, but like the guard will jump on purpose so that they like can get reoriented. That was not in play, because it's 4th and 13. Similarly, if you can't bluff if you're Bielema, because then you're setting up a 4th and 18 if you delay of game, right? Because that's the alternative. You take the delay of game, but then there's no way you're kicking, I would think. You have to go for it. And that makes it tougher time-wise to get the first down, spike it, and line it for another kick with no timeouts. So you're right. There's no way he was doing that on purpose. My thinking, and this is what I think probably went through his mind. I'm pretty sure he's going to call a timeout here, but kick it. I think whether he told him to take a practice shot if they call timeout, sure. I'm sure the kicker's coached to do that. Always snap the ball. Always take the free shot. Always do that. But this is where, and this is what I cannot get over. This is the crux of this entire podcast. What distance would that kick have had to be for Ray Shiano to not have tried to ice him? If that kick was from 67 yards, would he have tried to ice him? If that kick was from this is my number one criticism of Shiano in this moment. Well, if they were lined up for a 75-yarder, would you have called it? Like, there has to be some limit in your mind about when you would call it. And any logic will tell you that was outside of the limit. Maybe 50. I could maybe get by with that if you told me 50 yards is the limit. But beyond 50, like, now you're letting them line up, set the protection, get it. Even if he called it early, he's like, well, I could have called it earlier. Okay, that makes no sense.
Yeah,
Because
no.
the other thing would be if you're afraid of a fake, then you don't go for the block, which
Right.
I would have been perfectly fine. I would have been perfectly fine if they lined up in field goal safe defense and the guy hit it. Because the chances of them going for a fake were higher, in my opinion, than him making the kick. So but you can't have it both ways. You can't have it that like we're going for the block and we're afraid of a fake, and we're afraid that they might not kick. Like it can't be all of the above. And so that's again, I'm being very harsh because I think this just somebody has to be in that sideline saying, like, this is the field goal we're comfortable with them letting them kick. We're just going to let them do it if they do. Maybe it's 55, maybe it's 50, and that clearly did not happen. I know I've litigated this to death, but like that decision should have been made before the drive even started by Rutgers.
Yeah. Well, that's why you have an actual special teams coach to be in the air. And yes, they have Shiano's talked about a coach that handles special teams, but Shiano's the special teams coach. He makes the calls. And I think, honestly, it's just reflex. I don't think he actually thought about how far it was. I think he was just like, it's a field goal. We're going to ice him. We're going to talk about it. We're going to overmanage. We're going to overthink it because that's what I do as a head coach in pivotal situations. And
the one mitigating factor that I'm being real harsh here, but this is all happening in a very quick sequence. There are field goal teams running out there. Your field goal team's running out there. You're not even sure if you got 11 healthy guys on the field goal team with the injuries that you've had. But again, if you jump off sides, it's still 4th and 8 in a 50-yard field goal. Do I want Rutgers to jump off sides? No, because a 4th and 8 is a more convertible throw. But like, yeah, maybe we only have 10 guys out there to go for this block or whatever. I can understand it gets hectic, but that's why I'm going to harp on the preparation. And for someone who is as prepared as Greg Schiano, I am blind. I am just, what the heck happened that you're prepared for every situation except like a situation that could win or lose a game. All right. I know I got really upset there, but this was crazy. Any other thoughts on that field goal before we talk about the defensive call?
Yeah, I don't know if it's fair or not, but I did have the thought immediately after, and I still can't stop thinking about it because both Belima and Schiano briefly coached for Bill Belichick, and obviously Belichick's one of the greatest coaches of all time. But I was just thinking, if Belichick was on the sideline and the other team was doing that, how he would be internally laughing his ass off and just let it happen. And the self-edit there, I think that has been a kind of a recurring theme with Schiano in big moments where it's almost like he feels he has to make a decision. He has to do this to have an impact on the play. And the best decision was no action there. And it just, it's almost like it was like a car crash coming. You like when he actually called the timeout, I mean, I don't think any Rutgers fan had to be surprised. Anger is the first thought, right? But there's no surprise that he did it. It was almost like I was surprised right before the kick. It was like he didn't call it. Like they're actually going to kick this. Like it's actually happening. And Joy was like a second and a half away, and then he calls it, and it was just like you could see the car crash coming. It's just he could not help himself. I think it was a reflex. And to your point, which is excellent, and I don't know if anybody's made that. It's not an impulse decision. You have to have the decision made. And I'm guessing, I don't know, was it 60 yards? And this is 58. Yeah. So he said anything under 60, we're gonna think about or ice. Yeah. It's just crazy, especially not only because the guy kicked the 59-yarder early in the year. It was his only attempt. He hadn't kicked anything in the game other than those kickoffs, and he just had. I think the fact that he had a kickoff earlier in the quarter go out of bounds, so short of the end zone, it makes it that much worse. If that didn't happen, I think you could say, all right, I still would be against it. But the fact that you had actual evidence to make a decision off, you're not calling that blind there. It's maddening. And I don't think I'll ever get over that call.
I agree. All right. So the defensive call, I think matters less in the context because morally you're so deflated about what just happened.
The game's over. Right, the game is the game is over, and now it's like what and
Yeah.
you don't have the benefit of the timeout, like you said, which makes it even worse if you know the rule that you can't call it. So basically, my question to you is, when they called that timeout, did they go over the defense? If they come out and go for it instead of kicking it, we're going to play this defense. Do you think that conversation happened in the huddle?
I have no insider information on that. And obviously, like, I haven't talked to Harris Simiak in 20 years, but like, clearly it looked like a little bit of a spur decision.
Yeah.
Because if you have time, you're never going to go zero blitz, in my opinion. Now, it might have been Shiano, might have been Harris Simiak, might have been both. I don't know who made this decision. But, I mean, Greg Williams got fired as a Jets defensive coordinator for this exact decision. Now, that was a 3rd and 6, which makes this even less forgivable. Because in that situation, it was 3rd and 6, you're avoiding a check down. In this case, you want the check down. Because if he gets tackled short, the game's over.
Yep.
The game's over. And I just, thinking back again to the sequence of how few passes they actually completed on those previous 2 drives. And conversely, I don't think the refs would want to end the game by calling a pass interference or holding unless it was absolutely egregious. Again, as a former official as well. So I think there was just overthought it that, like, hey, we need to get pressure. We go up the middle. You know, he doesn't have his sight lines. But then you're just inviting him to run it around the right side when he had already run a 30-yard touchdown, which is why that logic doesn't really make sense to me. I did still look like they should have tackled Bryant, but even if you tackle him, they still would have had time, even if he went down right away. Because I'm kind of surprised he ran it, because he should have been coached probably to just take a knee immediately.
Well, he was.
He said reacted.
He was. Yeah, he said
so,
the play to go down.
Right. But
he took a shot.
I mean,
he saw a shot and he went.
The other thing I think is important that we haven't covered enough is a lot of times in these situations, the quarterback might just say, like, let's say you're in a prevent. And again, I'm generally not for prevent defense in general, but the reason it doesn't exist is this exact situation, because if you hold your coverage enough that he has 2 choices: dump it to a guy who has to beat like 4 defenders to reach 13 yards, or just throw the Hail Mary and hope that you get it. Like, those are choices. If you run like an cover 8 men coverage, and I know Rutgers has struggled with tackling. I understand that. I know that they have true freshman Kevin Levy in there. I understand that. But you have to just force them to check the ball down. That is 4th and 13. If it was not 4th down, then I know that the clock probably would run out because of the timeouts, but then they could run out of bounds. They could throw a 7-yard hitch route, set up an easier field goal, or set up a shorter Hail Mary or whatever. But 4th down and 13, I don't know who made the call. I don't know who approved the call. I don't know if they decided this before the drive, like, hey, we're going zero blitz. But I can tell you, this got Greg Williams fired with the New York Jets. And logically, I just think that you're daring them to just – and here's my biggest problem with the whole thing. They're looking for flags, right? Bryant clearly has good chemistry with Altmaier. If he just said, run to this exact yard marker, let's say it's the 30-yard line, stop, and I'm going to underthrow you on purpose to draw a flag, it would have drawn a flag guaranteed. Guaranteed. Yeah. There's no doubt. Like, if he just threw to a spot, and that's why I don't think you can go zero blitz there. Again, I'm Monday morning quarterbacking, but as soon as I saw it in the moment, and you can ask my wife who was watching with me, I knew it was the wrong call, because as soon as the guys came in the double A gap, the announcers called it out. Altmaier clearly hesitated. He saw it was coming. And then, I mean, they protected it several times. I mean, they hadn't got to him with that. I think they tried it twice earlier in the quarter. So all to say that I don't think this is a fireable offense. Like, in terms of coaching bad malpractice, not taking a knee is like maybe here, and that's still Mario Cristobal didn't get fired, and now is probably taking his team to the college football playoff. One step up from that is probably trouble with the snap, Michigan State, which didn't get Harbaugh fired, and he went on to win a national championship. Like, this is still one level up from that. Like, I don't think this is like the worst coaching decision of all time. This is not a fireable offense. This is none of those things. But I can tell you, I was never more frustrated in a moment as a Rutgers fan, because I didn't think they had a shot to win this until maybe 3rd and 13, 4th and 13. So all of that positive emotion was just, reaching a crescendo to just like fall off a cliff. Whereas like the only other times you could argue that was like the West Virginia game in 06 because it was an overtime. You go to another overtime type of thing. But like even the Louisville 2012 game, I didn't feel this upset. And those were program changing losses. This, I know you mentioned you were a little concerned about it because obviously this could be a hangover. But in the scheme of things, no one's going to look back outside of this program 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and like look at this and be like, that was the turning point. Unless things go completely to trash, like you lose, you have like one conference win the next 3 years or something. Like unless it's that bad, and Greg Schiano has shown us plenty of ability to get off the mat. Like I don't even think this isn't program changing. It's signing days in 10 days, 8 days. This isn't going to cause like half your recruits to decommit. So in the grand scheme of things, like it's more the visceral reaction and the hangover they might have from that.
Yeah, a few things there, but I have to ask you the logic of the blitz, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what was the goal? Was the goal
you're
going
to – the logic behind it is you're trying to force the quarterback to make a quick decision because he's afraid of the pressure and he's just going to throw it up there.
Right.
That's what you're trying to accomplish.
Right. So you're going for the incompletion, right? Basically,
yes.
You're trying to force –
You're not going for the sack. You're going for him just throwing it to us in the air and hoping that they don't come down with it. Or a flag.
Right. But what you said with the prevent, where you're basically making them go through an army of tacklers to get to the first down versus hoping they throw an interception, an incomplete pass. And to Aaron Lewis's credit, he almost got there again, which would have been, storybook for sure. But I just think the logic in it, right? You're hoping to force an incompletion when you should be guarding the first down marker with everything. And I just think it was flawed logic to begin with. Not only with the whole idea of personnel, I think it goes back to how many times this year have we said, okay, how they're coaching because how they want to coach versus actually the personnel they have on the field, it doesn't mesh. And that
I'll say this. If there was 5 seconds left and it was 2nd and 5, I'm okay more with it in that situation because
they can't kick it.
You're assuming he can't reach the end zone. Like the receivers can't get to the end zone in time.
Just keep him out of the end zone.
It's short. But with 13 seconds, they had time to get a closer field goal. And so I assume this was discussed in the huddle, but clearly it seems like they just outsmarted themselves. I'm not sure. But again, if it was 5 seconds left, I understand you're scared of a Hail Mary. They got some big guys. You got backups in the secondary who have never defended a Hail Mary before. Right. But there were 13 seconds, and it was 4th and 13. That's the problem with that. And I don't know who ultimately made that call. I don't know if they're taking responsibility behind the scenes. I have no idea. But, I mean, this is one of the situations if you go old school football, like 80s, maybe 70s, the middle linebacker would call the defense and just be like, this is what we're doing. And if the play came in and they didn't agree with it, like if Tyrone Stowe was out there, he'd probably be like, we're not doing that. And like audible at the line or something. You know what I mean?
Well, that was the thing. I mean, Jordan Walker dropping back in coverage. Like, when does that ever happen?
But even then, what was he going to do? Tackle?
Well, that's what I mean. I don't understand what the point was. And then all you have to do in that situation, right? All right, the ball is complete. Like, all you have to do, like at that point, okay, they're probably going to get, time to kick a field goal. But the only thing you can't do in that situation is let them run free into the end zone. And it was like it's like he caught it and everyone's heart just sunk, like on the defense, on the field. Everyone just went into quicksand. Like it was like if you freeze frame the frame of the catch, it's like everyone kind of like took a body blow at the same time and a split second went down and then it was too late. It was over. And
which also could go to coaching. Because they should have known the pass might be caught. Like we're going zero blitz. He's throwing it up there. As a defensive player, your reaction should be like, they might catch it and we got to bring him down. They were like you said, they looked surprised. They looked surprised that this happened.
Yes. Everyone was in shock. The defense went out there in shock. They were shell-shocked. And that was, the car accident was calling the timeout. Everyone was in shell shock that it happened. that they changed course and they're going to throw it, and then it was like they caught it and everybody's like, what? And then it was over. It was as devastating a loss as I could ever remember.
Last thing is, again, on the prevent thing. One of the reasons it usually doesn't work is because the team can just throw a 7-yard out route, step out of bounds. But this was 4th down.
Yeah.
4th down and 13. So you can't just run like a 5-yard out route, take 2 seconds off the clock. It's over. Like, it's almost as if they forgot it was 4th down because of the timeout on defense.
And they forgot who the best player on the field was.
Well, yeah, I would have said, yeah, and this is what I wrote on Off Tackle Empire. Like, I would have triple team Brian if nothing else.
Yes, just don't let that guy beat you. Just don't let that guy run it in from 40 yards on the catch. Don't let that guy beat you.
Like I said, I've never, the only thing close, and somebody else brought this up, was the Joe Wieskamp off the side of the backboard shot. Because that wasn't a program-changing loss, but it could have been a program-changing win.
Yeah.
And it was like, what just happened? Like, we forced the guy to check up a prayer from the corner.
Yeah. That Notre Dame offensive rebound, though, in the in-state tournament, that happened like a second and a half.
As soon as Paul turned it over, as soon as they couldn't inbound the ball up to,
you knew it was over.
That I had already not mentally checked out, but I was like, maybe they're not going to win.
Yeah. So I think, with all being said, that's why I'm going to be critical. There's nothing Schiano can really say that makes it better, but I really didn't like his not even entertaining the question that Landy asked on Monday about, have you had any self-reflection? He just said, we're moving on. He just dismissed the whole question, and then unprompted brings up special teams as an issue, not the specialists, but special teams play. And I'm sure he found something, and there's some detail that he's upset with, and I'm sure it's valid. But to say it in that moment, I just think there's a lack of awareness there, or it just seemed weird and uncalled for. That, I don't want to say he threw the special teams under the bus there, but it was almost like overcompensating for you're asking me to admit I was wrong, so I'm gonna just like throw something else out there. When the defense gave up 4 straight touchdowns to lose the game, and yes, there were injuries, and he said that and he talked about it, and I get it. That was part of it, which goes to your whole that I think that's the other thing with all the injuries that happened with the guys they knew were going to have to be on the field. Why don't you just roll the dice and let them kick the field goal without if he didn't anticipate that Belima was going to potentially change? Like, of course, if you call a timeout, there's a chance they change the call.
Right. Even if he doesn't get the free shot. Right. I think, and I said to this you in text a lot, and everyone who I was venting about this, use the fact that they have no timeouts against them.
Yes.
The problem is that, yes, you have timeouts, but not having timeouts is a bigger disadvantage than having timeouts is an advantage, in my opinion, because it limits what you can do. They had to tell their field. My guess is that they told their field goal unit, like, as soon as they got near that, as soon as they had their last first down on whatever, the 38 or whatever, if this goes to 4th down, run out there immediately because there's no timeouts, right? Right. For regardless, because you assume that it's not going to, at worst, it's going to be a 53-yard kick, right? Yeah. So, maybe it was before that sequence, or once it was 3rd and 8, you're like, okay, if this is incomplete, run out there. And they don't have time to then adjust and be like, well, now it's 4th and 13. Don't run out there. No, you have to predetermine to your special teams. You know how many guys that is to go in and out? Like, you can't hear. It's like loud. You have to just tell them, run out there. So there's no chance to like call the. So their kicking unit probably had already started running on the field as soon as they saw that it went to 4th down. Yeah. Not even thinking that it was 4th and 13. And then Bielema probably let him go because he's like, well, I can't call timeout. I have no timeouts. Right. So as a Rutgers side, yes, going to the drive, they had 2 timeouts, but somebody's got to be on the sideline saying every play they're out of timeouts. They're out of timeout, just like you do in basketball. You do this in basketball all the time, right? Anyone who's played basketball knows that. So, that's the thing that also sticks with me is like their field goal unit had to be ready to go. Like having been in a field goal unit, like you got to be ready to run out there. And that, for some of the fatties, that makes them more tired than the actual play because, they're 330-pound dudes.
Yeah,
they
to their credit,
they could fall down. If a guy falls down, game's over.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, the whole thing's maddening. I don't know. People think I'm joking. I'll never get over this game. I'll never get over this game. And with all that was on the line and what it could set up the rest of the year, it's just heartbreaking because this team has gotten off the mat. And Shiano's done a tremendous job getting them off the mat, getting those 2 wins, setting them up for this 3rd straight win. It would have been just to do it on senior day. It would have been so satisfying for those players, for the program, for the coaches, for the fans, and to just have it fall apart the way in which it fell apart in a manner in which we've had frustrations over the years. Really the only criticism you can have of him, I think, in terms of just game management and kind of being able to win the big ones, so to speak. The fact that this added on to that 15-year, 40-game drought in this way, it's just, you couldn't make it up. It just was awful.
Thanks for discussing this with me. I needed this purge.
Well, I hope if you listen to this all the way, thank you. This was therapy for us, and always a pleasure to talk to you. On the record, Rutgers football, heartbreaking losses you'll ever see. We have a game preview coming out later this week for Michigan State. Let's hope they can bounce back once again and get the first winning season in a decade and most Big Ten wins in regular season since joining the league. Thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful Podcast.